Hi, everyone. My name is Mathew Rodriguez, and I am the associate editor at The Body and The Body Pro, both websites dedicated to telling stories and sharing news about HIV. I'm also the co-host of this episode of the conversation series, A Time to Listen. This program is presented by the New York City AIDS Memorial, which was conceived as a place to honor all the people in New York City who have died from AIDS, as well as to commemorate and celebrate the efforts of caregivers and activists in our ongoing response to HIV. The memorial had planned a new on-site project for spring 2020 called Hear Me, Voices of the Epidemic. Conceived as a sound installation, Hear Me will be made up of audible moments from the historical and ongoing response to AIDS in New York City, from oral history to news clips, found footage to dance songs, and more. Hear Me will be the second project under their Arts and Education initiative, which was started as an important step in creating a living, breathing memorial. This project is currently on a temporary pause due to the COVID-19 crisis. However, the postponement has provided the memorial with the time and space to delve deeper into how they find and choose and curate content for the installation from both historical and contemporary sources, resulting in A Time to Listen. The New York City AIDS Memorial hopes to install Hear Me this fall 2020, and of course, we'll keep you posted as the installation is confirmed. The topic of today's episode is literature. And when I was pondering this topic, I began to think about how the beginnings of literature mirrored the beginnings of the AIDS epidemic. Before there was writing, physical writing, there was oral storytelling. And during the AIDS epidemic, before there were any reports of AIDS or a name for the virus, people told each other stories of sickness, illness, and plague happening in their communities. Joan Didion famously said that we tell ourselves stories in order to live. Now, with the epidemic in its fourth decade, can we talk about the way that stories have helped us not only to survive, but to thrive? Just as stories can free us, sometimes they can leave us feeling trapped. I think about the role that silence has played in my own life and my own family. Growing up, my father was HIV positive, though I found out about his status only when I was 22 years old and he was 6 months from passing. Silence played a profound role in my not knowing about my father's status. Some of the silence came from shame from having my father having both HIV and using heroin as part of his story. Now, as a writer, I'm trying to unearth stories about his life in my own writing projects. So I wanted to start today's conversation with our two guests with a clip of AIDS activist Aaron Laxton reading an excerpt from an essay by another AIDS activist, a very famous AIDS activist, Iris de la Cruz. I chose this clip because I know Aaron and because I love that upon his diagnosis, one of the first things he did was decide to pick up a camera and start telling stories to anyone who wanted to watch on YouTube. Those stories included also, like what you're about to see, him reading other people's work. I'm sure that these essays gave him and the people who watched them great comfort. I also love this essay because De La Cruz speaks about her own journey, not only as a woman with AIDS, but as a person who uses drugs and a sex worker living with AIDS. And as the son of someone who lived with AIDS and who used drugs and was a Puerto Rican person living in New York City, her story offers something to me and fills in some gaps in my own life as well.
I used to transport AIDS patients a lot, since I was the only one that didn't give the dispatcher a hard time about it. By the time they were finding out that the disease wasn't airborne, and it was only transmitted by bodily fluids. So I would wear gloves but refuse to wear a mask or suit up to transport AIDS patients. ER nurses would run all kinds of guilt trips about what I was bringing home to my family. I once had a big fight with a charge nurse after I suctioned a patient in the ER with PCP. He was left for over an hour all congested. Medical staff on the whole resented AIDS patients. The feelings was that they were all faggots and dope fiends and deserved what they got. By this time, I knew what the signs and symptoms were. I knew I was positive for the AIDS virus. I was still working even though I was tired all the time. Finally, I had a patient go into cardiac arrest in the back of the ambulance. The man had a urinary obstruction and was semi-comatose. I panicked and started CPR without a mask. I found out later that he had active tuberculosis. A few weeks later, after working with soaring fevers, I was hospitalized. My temperature was spiking at 105.5 degrees, and the nurses were telling my mother to stay with me because I would not make it through the night. I was delirious and spoke with my father and grandmother. They both were dead, but I made it. I guess I'm too much of a bitch to die. I got out of the hospital 90 days later looking like the National AIDS poster child. I spent the next 10 months getting my weight and strength back. Locked in my mom's house, I felt like a germ. Back to feeling ugly and unloved. I didn't want to be touched because I felt unclean. In this society, women's bodies are unclean and have to be deodorized before they're acceptable. So now, on top of everything, I was diseased. My mother wouldn't hear it. She kept hugging me despite the fact that I shied away, began attending a mother's group, and forced me to go out. My first time on a train, I sat there looking at lovers and families and thinking that these options are closed to me. I would look at the person next to me and think, would they still sit next to me if they knew I had AIDS? I started attending a group for women with HIV. I felt like I was the only woman in the world with AIDS. It was all gay white men. This group changed that. All of a sudden, I discovered other women with the virus. They were black women, white women, Latinas, rich women, and poor women. They were addicts and transfusion women. They were mothers and sisters, lovers and daughters and grandmothers. Some were militant lesbians, and others were Republicans. Imagine that. Even Republicans get AIDS. And we were all connected by the virus. Outside, differences became trivial. Feelings and survival were everyone's main concern, and I learned that there was still a lot of love in me. The rage mellowed.
With that, I'm happy to introduce our first guest. Joining us today is Alicia Abbott, a writer and author of Fairyland. I met Alicia years ago and have learned a lot from her, not only as a writer, but as a writer navigating losing a father in the AIDS epidemic. So Alicia, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and then read what you've brought for us today.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here and such a pleasure to be in conversation with Timothy and also with you, Mathew, since I did meet you some years ago and found such kinship in your story. So I published a memoir about my father in 2013. He raised me as a single gay man in San Francisco after the death of my mother in a car accident when I was 2 years old. And I didn't have any siblings, and he didn't have any long-term partners. We were very close, and after he became sick, I was off in college and actually was living in Paris for a year. And he decided to come out and see me in order to tell me that he was sick and would I graduate school early so that I can move home and take care of him, because he wasn't very close with his own family at that point, because he grew up in Nebraska and never really confided in them about his personal life. And so I thought I would just I just set up my clip or my reading from Fairyland is during that visit to Paris when my father comes to talk with me. And I'm at the time, it's 1990, in the summer of 1990, and I'm living with a French boyfriend named Theo. Theo was at work when Dad and I took the train to the grounds of the Château de Fontainebleau outside Paris. We were sitting on the grounds near the spot where Emperor Napoleon bid farewell to his guard before going into exile in 1814. When my father finally revealed his news. Last November, I was diagnosed with pneumocystis. I know, Dad, you wrote me about it. It's like a really bad cold. It sounded awful. I'm sorry. Pneumocystis, he said, is a form of pneumonia, PCP pneumonia, where before I had ARC, AIDS-related condition, this diagnosis means I now have full-blown AIDS. I looked around the magnificent grounds of Fontainebleau, which stretched out across the horizon. The perfect order of the landscape was marred only by a huddle of tourists ambling by, taking pictures and shading their eyes from the severe noon sun. I looked back at Dad, who was staring intently at me with gentle, green eyes. His hands were busy, moving in the air, explaining. Though I knew he was talking to me, I felt as if I were far away. I imagined myself joining that clumsy crowd hurrying back to their bus. I could see myself boarding and then watching the father and daughter talking on the bench as the bus pulled away. Pneumocystis means full-blown AIDS, he repeated. He might only have a year to live or 6 months. You have to make arrangements to graduate early and move home, he said, now that I have full-blown AIDS. Such a strange expression, I thought to myself. Full-blown AIDS. Why full-blown? I imagined being blown away as in, wow, that really blew me away. Or I thought of an orchid in the summer, its petals expanded to their full blossom, exploding with gaudy color, sticky nectar and scent. I pictured something blown apart, like a dandelion, fully blown, until nothing is left but the naked stem. Before the introduction of protease inhibitors in the mid-1990s, AIDS was considered a death sentence, and that death was a hard death, promising either physical degradation, lesions, wasting syndrome, mental degradation, or both. But for all the fears AIDS provoked, the nature of the disease was inherently confusing, especially as it was diagnosed then in stages. You could test positive for the HIV virus without having symptoms. You could be sick with AIDS-related condition, ARC, without having AIDS. Only when you were diagnosed with certain specific illnesses, pneumocystis, for example, did you have full-blown AIDS. Only then was death near. Before my dad came to Paris, I'd sought refuge in my ignorance about these stages, in the dense thicket of medical jargon that separated living with HIV from dying of AIDS. Dad was my accidental conspirator, downplaying his HIV status before he showed any symptoms, insisting he didn't have AIDS when he was only suffering from AIDS-related condition, and only telling me he had full-blown AIDS when he felt it necessary for me to make plans to return home. He wanted me to enjoy my college experiences fully for as long as I could, but the problem with this otherwise sensible strategy is that when it came time for him to tell me he was truly sick and dying, I was unprepared. I tried to recount my night to Theo. He already knew Dad was sick with AIDS-related condition, but like me, had a hard time grasping the distinction my father detailed. I raged at his stupidity before devolving into a puddle of tears in the bathroom. When I finally told my grandmother that my dad had AIDS, I wanted to throw up. I was sitting on the floor of our kitchen, leaning against the closed door in a parody of privacy. Munka seemed to respond to my news as though she were expecting the call. Yes, okay, she answered calmly. What do you need from us? Choking back sobs, I couldn't answer at first. I felt dumb and foolish. I don't know, I said. Nothing, I guess. Theo lacked the intuition to understand why I had a meltdown in the freezer section of our local grocery that afternoon, exploding into tears because of a conflict over frozen moussaka. And he didn't know why I started crying the next day when late to meet my father. I didn't have time to buy fresh fruit at the open market. But I need to eat a piece of fresh fruit every day, I yelled. What is wrong with you, Alicia? I always have fresh fruit. Don't you understand? This is what I want. I don't want this other life. July 2nd, 1991, a letter from Dad. Dear Alicia, I just got home and unpacked. If I tried to imagine a perfect daughter, I couldn't imagine anyone better than you. I could tell that you and Theo really put effort into making my stay enjoyable. Not only getting that nice hotel, but all the places we ate at, fixing food for me yourself, lugging around with me to that party at the Pompidou Center. And I want you to know how much I appreciate your love. I'm sorry too that the state of my health is understandably a sadness for you. I think some of your irritation and grouchiness were probably because you feel bad and you get angry that this is my situation, our situation. But it would probably be better to know you're angry because I have AIDS and that doctors haven't found a cure for it, then to shift your anger to all sorts of things, not having time to get fruit or whatever. Sometimes I get really angry too. I got especially angry when I had to cancel an earlier planned trip to visit you. But as it turned out, I probably had more time than I otherwise would have. Or I get angry that I can't see like I used to. So I get angry and feel the emotions, and then I realize, since there's nothing I can really do to change things, I might as well accept life as it is. Hanging on to anger only wears one out, and it's hard on those around you. And I realize there's still a great deal in life to enjoy and be thankful for. Much love, your dad.
Thank you so much for that, Alicia. And I wanted to ask you, as you were reading, and I've been with you in the room when you've read from your book before, and I guess I wanted to ask you, what is it like for you to write something like that and feel like, did you feel like it was your story and your father's story, or it was your aspect of your father's story? Like, what did you, when you were writing Fairyland, whose story did you think it was, and how did you approach it?
Well, Fairyland begins with my finding my father's journals after he died. And the journals, even though I was aware they existed, I found a trove that I'd never seen before, and that gave me insight into his life. And in one of the journals, he wrote, who am I writing for? Maybe I'm writing for Alicia so she'll one day know where her parents were at. And he even wrote about imagining that a version of a novel that would be told from my perspective of our life together. So I had a sense that in having those journals, that I had some permission to tell our story and also access to his story. It was really clear to me that I didn't want this just to be my story, but I wanted to, be able to give a lot of his voice. It was really important for me today to be able to read an excerpt where I could share a letter he wrote. And there was a lot that was going on in his experience of his illness that he didn't share with me. As I said in that excerpt, in the letters to me, he sort of downplayed his illness because he didn't want to get in the way of my experience. But I'd find in his journals that, he was battling with depression, or, there were just a lot of complications I didn't know about. And so I really wanted to be able to have it be a shared story. In some ways, it was sort of a collaboration, like a post-mortem collaboration. And in writing the book, in going through his letters, his journals, but also excerpts of his poetry and essays, I felt like I could be in conversation with him and midwife some of his work in this other context. And it was deeply satisfying for me, to the point where ending the book was really sad because I felt like I couldn't continue that.
Mm. Thank you so much, Alicia, for sharing all that with us. So I'm really excited to introduce our next guest, Timothy DuWhite, who is an amazing writer, poet, and playwright. Timothy was also recently awarded a residency from the Brooklyn Academy of Music, as well as a playwriting fellowship from the Public Theater. So I would love for you, Timothy, to introduce yourself and then read what you're going to share with us today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, and that was absolutely gorgeous, Alicia. I was so glad to experience your work. I don't think I've had the pleasure before, so I'm happy to hear more of your thoughts. And also, your reading actually made me choose a different thing to read. I think something about that, I just felt like I wanted to go a different direction. So thank you for that as well. As Mathew said, my name is Timothy DuWhite. I'm a playwright. I write in different genres, but generally I like to just say I'm a poet, and that kind of covers the span of all the other writing I do. And this piece, I was going to share a piece that I wrote actually about me and my mother's relationship to disease. But I wanted to do this one instead. I wrote this in February, and it's basically about the threat or the sort of, what's it? I don't know, the wish that folks tend to give like queer people of like, I hope you catch AIDS and die. And particularly that sentence I've heard said or written in many different places, and how it's actually literally impossible to catch AIDS. So that's like one thing. So yeah. I hope you catch AIDS and die. And I mean that, like, no funny shit. Black folks have a tendency to wish, but I'll be perfectly Caucasian today and offer you hope. I hope you catch it all in one fell swoop. Skip the whole HIV and jump straight to AIDS with the opportunistic infection already attached. I hope you battle the medical industry with a never before seen. I hope you baffle the medical industry with a never before seen case. I hope your blood is made legend for how quickly it gets to the point and cuts out the middleman. Usually, AIDS is only the result of the contraction and progression of HIV. Usually, AIDS is a disease quite literally, absolutely, scientifically impossible to catch, but fuck that. I hope you catch AIDS like an American. I hope you catch it like a flyaway baseball approaching slowly from the heavens. I hope everyone surrounding you in the bleachers hosts you in the air and AIDS lands gently into your hand-me-down mitten. I hope the entire stadium erupts in cheer and Harold Steinbrenner renames the Yankees in your honor. I hope your faggy ass catches it at 12 years old while jerking off to the image of your 20-something math teacher. I hope the picture of his biceps edging over a desk sparks a flame in you until a miracle. 12-year-old you reborn a sickly Virgin Mary. I hope every sacred space in the world praises your name. I hope you catch AIDS, despite how biologically impossible that is. I hope everyone else with AIDS looks on in awe of you. I hope your AIDS becomes the new craze. I hope everyone with HIV shuts down their blogging accounts, now cognizant of taking up too much space in the conversation. I hope you are researched by graduate students at Johns Hopkins, and your blood is discovered to be the key to the survival of all the perishing bees. I hope you catch AIDS and die. The dying is my true hope. I hope you die with $40 in your pocket and 40 T cells in your blood. I hope you die despite the medical professionals' best efforts in the Oprah interview you are still scheduled to do. I hope you fuck up Oprah's programming. I hope the entire government collapses beneath her anger towards you and everyone becomes their own president. I hope the AIDS you caught kills you while you're using a public restroom, drinking someone's backwashed Diet Coca-Cola, chewing your fingernails, flirting at the DMV, peeing on a bush, spitting at a police officer, voting for a presidential candidate, scrolling through Grindr, scrolling through Farmers Only, holding the door for a stranger, crying at a Nicki Minaj concert, smoking weed at the pier, getting the lawnmower from the basement, licking the ice cream dripping down your cone, brushing the lint off your date's face, proposing in a crowded ice skating rink, farting on a Brooklyn-bound 3 train. I hope you die in your childhood bed with everyone you have ever loved surrounding you, all returned from the time they loved you the most. All of them staticky and clamoring, whispering, if he had to die, at least it was like this. At least it would be a death ruled special, an unheard of sort of ending, the antithesis of ordinary, an undermining of nature, a medical anomaly, the one who caught the disease fully bloomed and who did not need to water anything. I hope you catch AIDS and die, because how many of us are given the privilege of a death shared by no one else in the entire world? And I like to think that this is what they mean. I like to believe that when Cardi B said, I hope your fucking mom catches AIDS, bitch, she was contemplating the existential crisis of being. I like to believe she was jostling with the cliche of death, exhausted with how rote it all has become in the world and her own music, that she wanted to offer something different. If someone's mother had to die, she wanted it to be in a way that no one ever has before. What a special experience for a child, to know that the only thing that could take down their mother was the impossible. I like to believe Summer Walker chose the word infested when saying, suck a fat, stinking, uncircumcised, HIV-infested dick in order to connote something familial, as if to say the body too can act as a house overrun with so many more vermin, so many more vibrant, scurrying living things fighting to survive. What a beautiful image, infested. Inside of all of us, a community that is steadily growing, learning, rebelling, evolving, us all our own little countries. I like to believe that every homophobe that screams, catch AIDS and die, while my partner and I are walking hand in hand on the street, actually just wants us to feel special. That each hope for my demise I receive in my inbox is actually a proclamation of what this world owes me and people like me. Because if not this, then what? If not acknowledgement of how powerful we are, then why is it this nonsensical, medically impossible, asinine statement hurled from so many mouths, smeared on so many backs and stars, scratched across the face of so many yearbook pictures, saying that you wish I am shot or hit by a bus or pushed off a building is far more precise, the kind of death you can count on. When you tell me you hope my death is via catching AIDS, what you're saying is you want me to live forever, or at least until a miracle occurs. And in response, I say thank you. This world can keep the bullet. I'll take the impossible death. I wonder what kind of heaven that sort of passing will offer me. I wonder if God will wash my feet when I arrive, impressed by the way I cracked her so delicate design.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Timothy. That was amazing to hear. It was obviously my first time hearing it, but I'm very happy that you shared it with us. And can you talk a little bit about, I mean, I kind of love the repetition of the word hope in that context. Like, I think it reminds me almost of like speechifying, like when someone speaks in that way, that they're talking in front of a group of people, and like there's this I mean, I'm repeating the word repetition, but it's this really great device. Can you talk a little bit about your personal kind of definition of hope and how you're using it and playing with it in that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I think hope is used very often as a means to I don't know, to like, I don't know, hope tends to be an equalizer in a lot of conversations. Like, if we just have hope, then we don't have anger a lot of times. Like, hope tends to like take away anger, take away like frustration, because if you're experiencing those things, it's implied that you're not being hopeful and that you're not trying to pursue something better. And this is found a lot in like a lot of Obama's campaigns was focused around hope and this idea of what this could possibly be. And once you buy into this concept of hope, then you buy out of the concept of like wanting to destroy everything around you, because you have hope that the things around you could be better. So I wanted to use hope in this context. For one, that's how the statement tends to be. Like, I hope you catch AIDS, which is like, that's a corralling statement. Like, you're saying you hope I catch AIDS, as in like you hope your whole community, like your whole community is hoping this for me. You know, everyone who thinks like you is hoping this for me. And like, there's so many, and I use the descriptions, or I originally decided to write it because of Cardi B and a singer who's irrelevant, Summer Walker, said these horrible statements about like what we've always heard throughout the years. I hope AIDS as like a weapon, AIDS as like a form of punishment or a form of like imprisonment, right? And I was just like, it's so interesting that even, not even to say like in 2020 that this is happening, because let's be 100, but it's interesting to like see that this is still, I don't know, I thought it was just interesting that it's still a tool. Like, even now, people are still saying, like, I hope you catch AIDS as like a verdict. And it's like, damn. But then also that statement, as I was like pointing to is actually impossible. I cannot physically ever catch AIDS. Like, you can't do that. Like, it doesn't work that way. So you're asking of something that is impossible of me. So you want me to live forever if that's how you want me to die. So yeah, I just wanted to offer. I wrote this piece as an offering to other people with HIV, and also to queer people who don't even have HIV or AIDS, but this is swung to them all the time.
I'm wondering, Timothy, if you can also maybe introduce the clip that you brought with you of Danez Smith.
Yes. I absolutely adore Danez Smith. I think their work is, their work is just prolific and amazing, and they're like one of the writers of our time. Like, if there's a list, Danez is on it, or more likely off the top of it. So aside from their book, I forget. Oh Jesus! They have a book that did very well, and I cannot remember it. Don't call us dead. That's the name of it, I believe. And Homie, yes, Alicia. That's the newest one. So yeah, I just would want to intro by saying this artist is amazing, and this poem in particular, I just absolutely adore, because I remember when Danez, because I was a fan of them before they shared with the world that they were HIV positive. So this was the first piece that I've heard of them like talking particularly about their experience with this disease. And it was just like a breath. I don't know. It just drew breath into me. Because for one, we obviously carry similar identities, like Black, queer, all these things. So to see someone else in my realm of work speaking about this in a way that is not fearful, or in a way that is not like accommodating to people's comfort, I just loved. So yeah.
Great, let's jump right in.
Today I'm at work, pissed only because I'm at work. My boss is still confusing as shit. I ate a too expensive salad and it was good and too expensive, but I'm grateful. Today I remember I love praying over my food, thanking God for the meal and the hands who made it and the hands who made the hands who need bread I break. Today I am grateful. Today, the diagnosis does not own me. Today, I'm more than HIV positive, and my blood is just blood, and not poison or the river Styx or godless. Today, I am bare of the ghost. No longer a graveyard, I have become a garden, and what grows here is not dead. And what grows here will not kill you, and what grows here is the sweet fruit at the root of mercy, and I am full of so much. Every dawn I see is proof I've been spared. Dance with me in that thought for a while. Watch my body not die and not die, this miracle that never stops being a miracle, for I know death well. He comes to my door every day, hungry for my hand, but I tell him wait, because today is not a day for sadness or truth or the blood that won't stop. Today is a day for nothing to be enough, to swallow the sun and still not be satisfied, but today I'm satisfied. Today, I am a gate who turns its doors into wings. Last night, I was in bed with two men, and I was the bottom of the totem, eagle-faced pig boy God. Please don't let what my body craves make this a poem about shame. I am not shamed. For all my mouth has turned into a slow lake of stars. I'm not shamed for my body and all the false gods that have been praised here. Let my body be a godless church, holy for no reason beyond itself. Let the curse of my blood be the Old Testament, and each day I am still alive be the new. Let this blood be the wine, this body be the bread. If there is no Savior, let me do it myself. Let me forgive myself of my sins, and today I forgive myself. Today I forgive the boy I was and the boy I am too. Today I forgive that boy and his silly, sick blood. Today I forgive my blood for fitting in. Today I forgive my God for giving me control over this body. I forgive my body for being drunk off free will, and today I'm free. And the sun is still the sun, and the moon still the moon, and not a metaphor for the dead light of my blood. And my blood is so alive, and my God, still my God, my mom, still my mom, my joy, still my joy, my name, still my name, and it is a good name. And I am still here. Dear God, I am still here, despite.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I was kind of blown away. That was my first time seeing that, so I'm kind of like blown away by it. The part I think that sticks with me is the part where they talk again and again about forgiveness, forgiving themselves. They talk about forgiving God, forgiving. I think they say something like forgiving themselves for I can't remember everything. Sorry, but it's like forgiving themselves, for being young and for not knowing and for all those things, and forgiving themselves for, hating themselves when they were younger and stuff like that. It was really powerful. I'm interested to hear both of your reactions to that really quickly. I mean, I know obviously you brought it, Timothy, but is there anything new that maybe this time popped up for you?
Not new, but the one particular part I really mess with and I love is when he says, "The sun is still a sun," and not a metaphor for the dying blood inside of me. Like, it was something about that line registered with me, because in my writing, I tend to I did this a little more. I tend to turn my blood into something vast and beautiful and important and majestic, like the sun or like all these other things, instead of allowing my blood just to be my blood, because I felt like it wasn't good enough. So I needed to write something to make it feel bigger and make it feel like it needs to be seen and respected, when it can't just be respected because it's my blood that's keeping me alive. So it was something about that line that really made me feel like I had to really face that, this is my body. I don't need to in my writing to transform it into something that it isn't in order for it to be important or worthy. So yeah.
Oh, I just was saying that was my first time also hearing that Dinesh reading, and it had the energy of a sermon. It was so powerful and so commanding and so life affirming and so defiant that you just wanted to, you felt moved to your feet, it was a really beautiful. And I think the line that really stuck with me was about my blood is not poison, and this land, is still a fertile land, or, this idea of that. Is that, I don't know, remember the line exactly, but I was it really stuck with me.
Yeah, well, it's funny what came up for me that was sermon-like that I noticed throughout was that it was while they were reading, there was a call and response. There, the audience was speaking back to Dinesh as they were reading, and that was so. I mean, that is almost to me what made it sermon-like. I loved that. Alicia, I know that you brought something to read of someone else's work. Would you like to introduce it? Then you can go ahead and read it.
Sure. I don't know if it's okay to show covers, but I have an excerpt from Sarah Shulman's book, Gentrification of the Mind, which came out in 2013 and was a really important book to me. I mean, I've long been a fan of Sarah's writing, her plays, her work in the community, her voice, for decades has been really important. And I'm just really excited to, to be able to share it. And I'll tell you, I'll talk a little bit afterwards why. 81,542 people have died of AIDS in New York City as of August 16th, 2008. These people, our friends, are rarely mentioned. Their absence is not computed, and the meaning of their loss is not considered. 2,752 people died in New York City on 9/11. These human beings have been highly individuated. The recognition of their loss and suffering is a national ritual, and the consequences of their aborted potential are assessed annually in public. There have been commemorated with memorials, organized international gestures, plaques on many fire and police stations, and a proposed new construction on the site of the World Trade Center, all designed to make their memory permanent. Money has been paid to some of their survivors. Their deaths were avenged with a brutal, bloody, and unjustified war against Iraq that has now caused at least 94,000 civilian deaths and 4,144 military deaths. The deaths of these 81,542 New Yorkers who were despised and abandoned, who did not have rights or representation, who died because of the neglect of their government and families, has been ignored. This gaping hole of silence has been filled by the deaths of 2,752 people murdered by outside forces. The disallowed grief of 20 years of AIDS deaths was replaced by ritualized and institutionalized mourning of the acceptable dead. In this way, 9/11 is the gentrification of AIDS. The replacement of deaths that don't matter with deaths that do. It is the centerpiece of supremacy ideology, the idea that one person's life is more important than another's, that one person deserves rights that another does not deserve, that one person deserves representation that the other cannot be allowed to access, that one person's death is negligible if he or she was poor, a person of color, a homosexual living in a state of oppositional sexual disobedience, while another death matters because that person was a traitor, cop, or office worker presumed to be performing the job of capital. In 1987, ACT UP's affinity group Grand Fury created an installation in the window of the new museum. It may have been the first work about AIDS in a major art institution. The installation was called Let the Record Show. Employing the politics of accountability at the root of ACT UP's ethos, the show featured photographs of real-life individuals who were causing the deaths of our friends. People like North Carolina Senator Jesse Helms. Helms had just said that the government should spend less money on people with AIDS because they got sick as the result of, quote, deliberate, disgusting, revolting conduct. In the background of the installation was a photo of the Nuremberg Trials. The implication was that the specific people who caused our friends to die would one day be made accountable. They would be reduced from their undeserved grandeur into wilted, hovering little men like Rudolf Hess, wasting away in Spandau prison. However, in the end, our public enemies, people like Cardinal Ratzinger, who called homosexuality, quote, an intrinsic moral evil, Mayor Ed Koch, President Ronald Reagan, etc., all got away with it. No one was ever made accountable. Our friend Sal Licata spent 9 days on a gurney in a hallway of New York City Hospital. He never got a hospital room. And then he died. No one has ever had to account for this. When Jesse died, his life was marked benignly. His crimes against humanity were barely mentioned. The names of our friends whom Ronald Reagan murdered are not engraved in a tower of black marble. There has never been a government inquiry into the 15 years of official neglect that permitted AIDS to become a worldwide disaster. Where is our permanent memorial? Not the AIDS quilt now locked up in storage somewhere, but the government-sponsored invitation to mourn and understand, equal to Maya Lin's Memorial to the Dead in Vietnam. Where is our wall of white marble with the names of every New Yorker who died of government neglect and blank tablets with room for more to come, surrounding a white marble fountain spouting water the color of blood? Where is our special prosecutor appointed by the president to investigate 15 years of US governmental indifference and its product, the global AIDS crisis? This corrupt abandonment of our people is far more destructive than Watergate, Iran-Contra, COINTELPRO, and every other government scandal that has resulted in special investigative hearings. Where is our federal aid to survivors and damaged communities? Where are the children of people who died of AIDS? There must be hundreds and thousands of them. Most children of murdered parents coalesce into some kind of community, but not these. I fear that the descendants of people who died of AIDS do not fully understand that their parents perished because of government and societal neglect, not because they were gay or used drugs. Where is our Nuremberg trial? Where is our catharsis, our healing? Where is our post-traumatic stress diagnosis? Where is our recovery?
You know, as we're kind of getting toward the end of this session, I want to invite, you know, all of us to think about what Alicia just read in the context of COVID and in the context of like where we are now with, you know, I think that there were a lot of things, specific things there that were powerful, but there was something where, as you can tell, I'm not very good with recalling things that were just read seconds ago, but it was like, you know, there's deaths that matter and deaths that don't matter, and government neglect, and Sarah even saying, you know, that 9/11 was the gentrification of AIDS. I'm wondering, I mean, that everything that you read kind of made me think about this moment that we're in, and this moment of getting to, some people kind of getting to mourn and others not getting to mourn. I mean, you know, a lot of people are not able to mourn the dead, or we have to mourn through Zoom funerals or something. You know, it's a really, and I think that I've always been someone who, I think there are a lot of people who resisted comparing COVID and AIDS, and I'm someone who's kind of always leaned into that comparison, because I believe that like it is a fundamentally paradigm shifting moment where people are forced to, for better or worse, or I mean whatever, but people are like forced to think about their own mortality and their own humanity in a way that they're usually not asked to. So yeah, I know I put a lot on the table there, but I'm interested, as we close this, to think about what it means to tell stories in the time in COVID times.
Yeah, I mean, this book was published in 2013, and you know, I want to acknowledge that our talk today is being hosted by the New York AIDS Memorial, and this didn't exist, you know, at the time that she published this. But I do feel that there has not been a process of accountability for those deaths, a public reckoning, and you know, obviously that line of where are the children of people who died of AIDS, why aren't they coming together, was something that, you know, I thought of you, Mathew, and sort of our community, and how hard it is to sometimes to find and bring that community together, because it existed in a sense of secrecy and shame, and a belief that they were all alone, when in fact they weren't. But with regard to with COVID, I mean, I think you still have portions of the population who are disproportionately affected, and those people are more Black and brown bodies. They're people who have to go to jobs, who don't have the privilege of being able to work from home, that have to put themselves on the front line. And I think also that there are people who've been scapegoated in the early days of COVID. And I think about, you know, our very president calling it, you know, reprehensibly the Kung flu, and this disgusting narrative lines that resulted in people being attacked, you know, which is definitely an echo to the AIDS years. But you also have, when 100,000 people died of COVID, it made the New York Times front page, and all those names were put on the front page. Whereas when 100,000 people died of AIDS, that was the New York Times buried in maybe page 18, or I don't know exactly what page it was, but it was not a front page story. And, you know, but I definitely, this idea of having a government that's downplaying the reality of what we're living through and trying to dismiss it. And someone in my social media feed, like when Trump got COVID, said, it's like if Ronald Reagan got AIDS. Someone wrote, was like, it was just sort of outrageous. And now it turns out he may be a super spreader, the super spreader, the ultimate super spreader himself. But I don't know if Timothy, you wanted to weigh in on that, or if we wanted to, I could also read a Recollectors story, but I don't know how much time we have.
I think we can do both. Why doesn't Timothy? We give Timothy time to respond, and then afterward, we can go right into. You can introduce and read the piece, Alicia.
Okay.
So actually, that book, The Gentrification of Mind, was so important to me because when I graduated from college, I moved to New York on my own. My family's from Brooklyn, but I moved here on my own in 2013. And that same year, I read that book. And like really shaped so much of my thinking around AIDS and HIV during a time where I really needed some type of like reorienting in my head. So yeah, Sarah Shulman is amazing. It's so important. And I guess I'm just piggybacking off of Mathew, the apprehension of saying of connecting COVID with HIV and AIDS. And I've been similar to you. I've been like opposite on that end. I've always been pushing how they're connected because so much of the conversations are being had, or even like the radical conversations around like how people, well, I know early on during like quarantine time, folks were saying how we need to like stop focusing so much on like what individual people are doing and then like look at the government and like look at like how this is even came into to be the extent it is. And like folks are really trying to do the work of looking outwards. Well, at least a lot of people that I saw, which is like HIV and AIDS like rhetoric. Like this is the work that a lot of HIV and AIDS workers, or myself, has been saying about our disease, about the idea of like how individual, like how the individualization of this disease makes it be able to like to exist. So this idea of like, oh, did this person wear a condom or did this person take their medication? If we only focusing on that, this disease is going to continue to exist because of like the world. So yeah, I always wanted to connect those two. And actually the piece I was going to read before I changed my mind connected those two and talked about the idea of being clean and how just that conversation of clean and cleanliness has been a terror for folks living with HIV/AIDS, and also a terror. In the piece, I make a connection between my experience with the idea of clean and my mother, who is who's an addict, and her experience with the idea of being clean, and how now the entire world is like getting a taste of what this is like. Yeah, I think the lines need to be drawn between these two things. And I think it's sad that it does, because I feel like I start that piece off by saying HIV could have saved lives. I feel like if people are listening to HIV advocates for as long as we've been speaking, a lot of what we know and a lot of what's happening with COVID would have been like not eradicated, because the government is the government, but it would have been like we've had better tools to organize against what's happening. So yeah, I just wanted to affirm the connection between the two and how it's important to keep those things in conversation with each other.
Yeah, I mean that's totally you hit so many different nails on their heads with that. It's that like because I wrote something about connecting them for the body as well, and I think that there was a lot of resistance to that idea very early in the COVID pandemic. And I don't know how to say it exactly, but I feel like there are a lot of people in the LGBTQ plus community, so when I wrote this piece, I specifically referenced an artist, a Canadian artist, who did a poster, and the poster said, "Your nostalgia is killing me." And the poster was about the way that people think of the AIDS epidemic as over, and think of it as a lot of people who especially, I mean, white people and people of privilege think of the epidemic as over. And when they see ACT UP things, they think only of the 80s, and not that like ACT UP New York is still around. I mean, a lot of ACT UPs are still around. ACT UP Philadelphia is still doing amazing work with people who use drugs and people living with HIV at the forefront. and talking about mass incarceration, all those things that intersect with HIV in our community. And it's just like, you know, it's almost like because they think of it as something that's in the past, they don't want to touch it, and they think that that it's sacrosanct, you know? And so like I've seen like the ACT UP New York Twitter account tweet things comparing the two, and people get angry with them, and they're like, no, like, don't touch the pink triangle, it's sacred, don't do this, it's sacred. It's like, the shit is still happening. And like, you know, as far as a lot of people that we know are concerned, these are, you know, what people are saying is like twindemic for like flu and COVID. It's like, yeah, that is, they in many ways are concurring epidemics.
So I wanted to read the Sarah Shulman excerpt first, because in her excerpt she says, "Where are all the children of people who died of AIDS? Where is that community?" And in fact, she was a really important voice for me in helping to reach out and find community of other people who lost parents to AIDS, because I knew they were out there, and I suspected they thought they were the only ones, you know, that they were alone. And I felt like they have really important stories to tell. And so in 2014 and 2015, a writer named Whitney Joyner and I founded a project called the Recollectors Project, where we would sort of interview people and have people write essays and collect and sort of compile stories about parents who died of AIDS, and also create a digital platform where people could meet each other and connect and on different issues. Like, you know, for example, when COVID first started hitting, a lot of people were like, "Is this seem familiar to you? How are you doing through all this?" It was really wonderful. So what I want to read is an oral history with a woman named Viviana Maldonado, who at the time was living in Omaha, Nebraska. Sort of as told, and I just edited it down. Around the time that I was 12, I went to the dentist's office with my father, about 15 minutes from our home in Lexington, Nebraska. I remember reading an article about HIV and AIDS from a magazine in the waiting room. There was a sentence like, "Someday HIV will become so prevalent that the person sitting next to you at church will have it." I kind of chuckled to myself thinking, well, that could never happen to me because I sit next to my dad at church. He's our pastor. He'd never get AIDS. My parents came here in the 1970s from Mexico. I was the first one from both families to be born on this side of the border. When I was 9, my parents told us we were moving to a small town in Nebraska. The Evangelical Free Church of America wanted my father to start a Spanish-speaking church because a meatpacking plant was opening and they were preparing for a big influx of Hispanics. After the plant opened a few months later, my parents quickly became something like the town's social workers. They taught GED and ESL classes on Saturday morning at the church. Sometimes we'd have a long line at our house of people wanting help filling out documents. When I was 14 and my sisters 10 and 4, Dad started to get fatigued. Eventually, he was hospitalized for an entire week. I didn't know what was going on, just that it was very bad. Mom cried on the way home every night, but she wouldn't say anything to me. I was scared, anxious, biting my nails. I didn't ask her. I knew that it was something big and our lives were going to be changed. I knew what AIDS was. Magic Johnson had interviewed kids for a show on Nickelodeon, but it never came up in our mission work, and we never talked about it in our house. At some point, Mom said, "He's very ill." Then she sat me down by myself and said, "He's HIV positive." We all had to get tested. We didn't get the results back for about a week. I was so nervous at school. It was a period of pure anxiety. Dad came back and was on bed rest for a few weeks. He was very quiet. It was like he couldn't look us in the eye. I'd say, "Do you need anything?" He would just nod. A month after Dad left the hospital, Mom said, "Next week, we're going to the church's board meeting. We're going to let them know that Dad has HIV. Dad wasn't fluent in English, so he needed Mom's help." What happened next was incredible. Everyone was so supportive. My father was really loved in the community. I kept expecting rumors to get really bad, but they never did. We were part of the Nebraska AIDS Project. We were assigned a social worker, and I went to support groups with him. I went to his doctor with him sometimes since his English wasn't great. It didn't feel like too much. I wanted to be involved. Our family was a team. By Thanksgiving, we had to help Dad stir in the kitchen. By Christmas, he was still able to talk and joke, but he was pretty much bedridden. He was not able to stand up, use his hands, do anything on his own. I was angry. He would say, when I go back to work, and I would say, you're not going back to work. And he would look at me with sad eyes. My family would say, why are you being so mean? I just wanted us to speak the truth. A month after his 50th birthday in February 2003, Dad passed away. My sisters and mother and I watched his last breath. We never found out how he got it. Mom said, is there anything you need to tell me? And he said no. He never said anything, and we never asked again. I didn't know how to talk about this with my family during his death, and now all these years later, I'm the one who wants to bring it up. It's not that I want to make everyone cry, but we didn't talk about it after he died. We didn't grieve together. We stopped talking about him altogether. Every year I would say to my family, I'm going to get involved this year. I'm going to do something. I emailed the Nebraska AIDS Project and said, do you have support groups for people who lost family members, like parents? Nope. I thought there must be people out there like me, but I figured I don't know about them because I live in Nebraska. Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing that in. So you said you had that. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Obviously, that's one of many stories that's been shared with the Recollectors through the Recollectors group. It's funny because we ourselves are kind of coming full circle now talking about this, but I'm interested in when you were thinking about making something for the Recollectors, what made, obviously you yourself are a writer, but like what made storytelling, do you think, like the central part of it? Like it could have just been like a social network for people who have lost their parents to AIDS, like a salon for people, but like,
yeah, I think
storytelling the central part of it.
I think there's something really powerful for people to tell their own story. I think that for this community, where a lot of the people in the group sort of lost their parents when they were kids, they kind of came of age not having a vocabulary to understand or talk about it. This is something that happened to them, and that often at the time they were told to lie about what happened to their mother or father, or they were lied to, and they only found out the truth years later. And sometimes, like decades later, they still can't shake that sense of like, I can't talk about this. And so I think just the aspect of authoring a story, like being the one who says, okay, this is what I want to say and this is how I say it, is a profoundly transforming act, where instead of being sort of the object of the experience happens to you. You write the experience, you shape the experience, like for an audience on your own terms. And so some people felt more comfortable writing essays, and some people didn't feel comfortable writing essays. And so we would set up these oral histories, and this was an oral history. And it was a real profound sort of honor for me and Whitney, and we both did oral histories, to be able to have these conversations and ask these questions and try to develop these stories with the person being interviewed, and then sort of edit it and then share it with them and say, does this sound right to you? And, get it to a place where they liked it. And then like for Viviana, as an example, she wanted to she was able then to share this story, to kind of go out there and share it with distant family and say, I know people didn't know that he died of AIDS. It was hidden to some members of the family, but I want to come out in the open now. And for me also, it personally to move away from my own experience, which has been really informed by my upbringing, growing up in a place like San Francisco with a father who was really active in the gay community. It was really important for me to hear stories from other parts of the country, from other types of communities, and to think about, you know, just the diversity of experiences, like the narrative of what we think of as you know, people with AIDS, and the experience of people living with AIDS is much more complicated than is understood. And so it was, you know, so that's why. And this story also, my father grew up in Nebraska, and so I had felt a connection with as well.
So I have a great I have a question for both of you, and I'm going to use like a deliberate word in the asking of it. Who is your favorite person to hear stories from? Like, who do you love to sit with and in your life hear stories from?
What do you mean? Like not a writer, but a member of the family?
Storyteller, but I mean like not like Edith Wharton. I can sit down and read an Edith Wharton book or something, but like who in your life do you love to as a storyteller?
I love my brother when my brother tells me stories, because it's very interesting. So my brother he's 5 years older than me. And whenever he's ready to tell me a story, he'll call me. And usually it's about like a show he's watching. And usually when he's telling me about a show he's watching, he's telling me about what he anticipates going to happen in the show, because he's really big on like figuring it out before like it goes. So he'll like tell me his theories, and then he'll like catch up with me and let me know like, oh, this happened, but it was close to what I thought was going to happen, that type of thing. But I love hearing stories from him because, for one, it's like he's very enveloping. So like you can't, if my brother's telling you a story, he is not going to end until the story is over. So even if something else happens, or someone else like comes like interrupts our story, or we have to get out the car or whatever, the story is still going to continue in some way, in some form. And I think I've learned so much about storytelling and like the excitement of telling a story from my brother, and a lot of that I've translated into my own writing.
Mm. You know, for me, I feel like I'm kind of a reformed gossip, but I think gossip is fun. I don't know, but like one of my favorite people to tell stories with is my friend Kevin. And I feel like when he's someone who for a living, he writes about television. And so his whole life is about writing about basically story that happens episodically every week. And he especially loves he's really good at writing about reality television. And I think reality television is so interesting in terms of story, because it's like people do something and then another people in another room shape it into a story, you know, like it's such an interesting process. And he's really good when we talk about people, about like taking the raw material we know of as story, you know, plot, character, setting, and putting them all there, but then also bringing nuance into it. Like I'll be very clear from the story kind of who is the hero and who is the villain, but he never casts the villain as solely villainous or the hero as solely heroic. And I feel like when I talk with him, even if it's to catch up about things that are happening in our lives, that he's bringing all of this like wealth of knowledge of what it means to craft a story into just like phone gossip. And it like always makes me excited to speak with him.
I love this question too. Well, I listen to, I do so many walks right now. I sort of spend a lot of my time at night going on long walks, more than I ever used to. And so I use a lot of that time listening to podcasts and listening to audiobooks, and sometimes, you know, just listening to voices in my ear to accompany me on these walks. And And I prefer to read memoirs written by the author, so I can have sort of the author tell their own story. But a couple of the voices that I've really loved sort of listening to telling stories, DJ Questlove was had an Instagram feed where he would DJ, like, and it was during the height of COVID, it would be like every night, but he would have like an evening dedicated to a musical performer like Prince, but he would know like amazing gossip and sort of backstory. And he would kind of give, like, he'd play the music, but he'd kind of do a music lesson at the same time and be like, now to hear this right now, and he'd like slow it down. And then he'd like, this sounds a lot like this. And I would just have I just felt like every time I listened to the show, I would learn so much. And it was just incredibly, I think it was healing. I mean, I really feel like we have been going through a collective trauma over the last 6 months. We've had to find ways to stay grounded and heal. And so like people who dedicate themselves to kind of being available and being the voice in our ears, I really have a lot of admiration for. And separately, as a writer who I don't get to hear his voice that much, but there's a quality of his writing style that sounds really gossipy and like fun, is Edmond White. He's just a writer that I've always really loved. And there's a quality of his voice, his written voice, that feels like he's someone sitting next to you at the table, like giving you this amazing gossip on everyone, who just has this incredible scholarship. And I have also enjoyed, listening to his interviews, and he's someone that I think I've been thinking about a lot, just because he's getting up there in age, and I feel like he's one of the voices that has kind of been through a lot and seen a lot. And so his memoirs for me, and I've read a lot of them, are sort of the great like oral histories of like the queer 20th century experience, like second half of the 20th century.
Alicia, since you love memoirs that are read by their authors, I should recommend you the audiobook for The Meaning of Mariah Carey, because her reading her memoir is
amazing,
Nobel worthy. I will send you both a clip that has been going around Twitter of her talking about her father hated snacking. And so when she was a kid, the only snack she would get was a single Ritz cracker. And she describes in detail what it was like for her to eat like a single Ritz cracker as a kid, and how she loved seeing the red box, like him pull out the red box and take out like a single cracker to give to her.
Oh my God, discipline.
So yeah, I just wanted to thank you both again for taking the time to speak with me today about HIV and literature and storytelling and all these amazing things that we got to. And I wanted to thank everyone who was watching for tuning in and making a time to listen with the New York City AIDS Memorial. AIDS history is our history and our future. You can email the AIDS Memorial at info@nycaidsmemorial.org, or send them a message on Instagram or Facebook at NYC AIDS Memorial to let them know of any archival audio or video clips of AIDS history that you think that they should share. Until then, be well.